The guardian was attempting to conduct a wellness check on Miss Angeli Johnson. The guardian had been granted guardianship of Miss Johnson by Magistrate David Stockwell earlier in that day. Officer Snyder and the guardian responded to 828 York Street and proceeded to the side of the door of the residence. Officer Snyder, knocked on the door and was met by Mr. Kevin Willingham. Officer Snyder told Mr. Willingham that he and the guardian needed to conduct a wellness check on Miss Johnson and that Miss Johnson would not be removed from the residence at that time. Mr. Willingham told Officer Snyder that Miss Johnson was fine and requested to review the magistrate's court order. The guardian handed Mr. Willingham the court order, and it was clear that Mr. Willingham became visibly agitated. As Mr. Willingham read the court order, Officer Snyder again requested Mr. Willingham to allow Officer Snyder and the guardian to enter the residence. Mr. Willingham gave the guardian the court order and stated, "We will meet in hell," and shut the door to the residence. Officer Snyder began knocking on the door and requested that Mr. Willingham several times to allow Officer Snyder and the guardian to enter the residence so they could check on the condition of Miss Johnson. After approximately 1 minute, Mr. Willingham told Officer Snyder to enter the residence. Officer Snyder requested Mr. Willingham to respond to the door of the residence 3 times, and each time Mr. Willingham, in a very calm voice at this point, responded, "Come in, the door is unlocked." Officer Snyder instinctively positioned the guardian away from the door or away from the entryway to the residence. The apartment, in description, if you look at the photo depicted, was equipped with a storm door and a wooden entry door. Officer Snyder held the storm door open with his right hand and pushed the entry door open with his left hand. Just for notation purposes, at this point, Officer Snyder instinctively felt that something was wrong. Mr. Willingham had expressed agitation initially and then went into a very calm state, and so there was some concern by Officer Snyder. After the door was open, the inner door that was pushed open by Officer Snyder, he observed Mr. Willingham standing approximately 10 feet from Officer Snyder in the hallway entry. Mr. Snyder had both arms extended and was pointing a black firearm at Officer Snyder. Officer Snyder, without regard for his personal safety, shut the door, turned and grabbed the guardian. Officer Snyder pushed the guardian to the front of the residence away from the threat represented by Mr. Willingham. Mr. Willingham exited the residence and continued to point the firearm at Officer Snyder. Officer Snyder retreated to the front of the residence and moved the guardian out of Mr. Willingham's line of fire. As Officer Snyder entered the front yard to the residence, he turned to his right and removed his department-issued firearm from his holster. Mr. Willingham continued to advance on Officer Snyder while pointing the firearm at Officer Snyder. The guardian heard Officer Snyder order Mr. Willingham to drop his firearm twice. Officer Snyder discharged his department-issued firearm 4 times, striking Mr. Willingham. Mr. Willingham fell to the ground and then dropped his firearm. Although loss of life is always tragic, Officer Snyder's action in placing the guardian's well-being above his own personal safety can only be described as heroic. The suspect was armed with what's described as a Bersa .380 semi-automatic weapon. The magazine was fully loaded, the hammer was in the cocked position, and the safety was off.